Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. We're just going to take a couple of minutes for the attendees to populate our list before we get started. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar series. The topic for today is stress and burnout for frontline staff. So just some housekeeping before we get started. Participants are on mute while we are on the call. You are on listen-only mode. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so feel free to type in your questions using the question function, and we will start taking them up around 1:45. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website. We also have a short survey at the end of the webinar, so please take a few minutes to complete it as the feedback is really valuable to us. Now, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Perlin Ng. I am the Research and Knowledge Exchange Coordinator at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. And we are joined here today by Jason Carey from Good to Talk. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
No problem.
So I'm just going to go ahead and read a little bio about Jason. Jason has been involved in counseling and crisis counseling since 1991 and directly involved with critical incident stress management, or CISM, for over 15 years. He became certified in CISM through the city of Edmonton, where he is originally from. His certifications are in basic and advanced CISM. He has worked and trained with the RCMP and the Department of National Defense, and was a member of the peer training team with Edmonton Garrison, Land Forces Western Area 1, PPCLI. In his tenure with the Edmonton Police Service, Victim Services, and DND, he has responded to natural disasters, industrial incidents, MVAs, abductions, suicides, child abuse, sexual assaults, fires, bank robberies, homicides, and conducted death notifications. In his 4 years with the DND, he conducted pre-deployment stress inoculations and post-deployment debriefings. His education has been ongoing over the years, but his education is in mental health with a focus on trauma and crisis counseling. He also has a master's in religion and a doctorate in Christian studies and pastoral counseling. Currently, Jason is a counseling manager at Good to Talk, which is a free confidential helpline for post-secondary students in Ontario. And over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Berlin. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Berlin. Thank you for everybody showing up for this webinar today. I understand that this is a much needed webinar, a little bit of, and if I can help to sort of provide a little bit of information, my experiences that may help other people, then that's really what this is all about. And coming from a frontline individual, for my last 26 years, I can certainly appreciate where a lot of people people are coming from when it comes to burnout and stress, when it comes to working on the front lines in a very difficult profession. All right, so Perlin went through my biography, so I'm not going to spend really any more time on that. I think with anything, especially with a subject like this, it's important to understand a bit of the history and where it comes from. And I'm not going to bore you a lot with a lot of the ins and outs of it, but to give you a brief snapshot of where it came from and where it brings us to today. So a little bit about the history of critical incident stress, which impacts all of us working on the front lines. As you can see, it spans from way back, from early days, from the Romans, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and of course Vietnam and the world wars. That's where it really came to the forefront. That there were more issues and evacuations due to psychological reasons than there were physical reasons. Critical incident stress is an acute stress reaction, and it's expanded to other frontline workers. So what originally was specifically thought of to be centered with military has now come into the civilian world, and this is where I come from. And it's actually documented now and listed in the DSM-5 as acute stress disorder, which we'll talk a bit about as we go through the PowerPoint. We'll also talk a bit about signs and reactions, and those signs and reactions actually don't differ much between what was typically seen in the combat role and what is now seen in the non-combat events of what we do on the front line. And all of these reactions are called critical incident stress, and that's what happens when we encounter something that is unexpected and overwhelming. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell, and this is where a lot of the structure comes from. And it's called the Mitchell model, and this is what I was trained in many years ago, and that's what other professionals are trained in as well, whether it's peer support or whether it's therapists. So what is acute stress reaction? Well, first off, as I said, it was introduced in the DSM-4, and of course with the DSM it changes very quickly. And it was actually listed as acute stress reaction, but now it is labeled, and I hate using that word, labeled, but it is actually labeled as acute stress disorder now because of the overwhelming need for it to be treated. We're seeing a lot of this really right now coming from law enforcement, paramedics, firefighters, and now frontline counselors who are dealing with individuals on a day-to-day basis. Typically what we see is any anxiety symptoms that occur will occur within 1 month of the traumatic situation. And it's important to understand, maybe a myth, but it's important to understand that the acute stress disorder trauma experiences will not include witnessing events on television and through electronic media. Despite what is out there, that's generally not what happens. So you're probably asking, what is a critical incident? And most times people think of a critical incident, they think that it's got to be something huge. It's got to be something completely overwhelming, worst case scenario, train wrecks, everything like that. But that's not how it is. So as you'll see, what is a critical incident? And it's any event that really is outside the range of normal human experience that we're used to. So it overwhelms the normal human experience of what we're used to. and it induces strong physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions in many situations. Now, it doesn't always necessarily mean that there's going to be an actual threat to life of another person or to yourself, but it's the perception. It's all based on perception. So one of the things that we deal, and the main thing that we use to deal with these kinds of situations to, I guess, remove, diffuse from a situation. So any frontline worker, whether it's a psychologist in private practice or whether it's somebody working at Good to Talk, our counselors here, whether it's somebody working at a university or a college dealing with a client who is coming to you for a private session. All of this can be taken in and used in the moment, as well as with your colleagues. And really it's designed very, very effectively to be able to be used quickly and efficiently. And so from my military experience, what they typically call a defusing is a walk and talk. And it's a very quick situation that has an element of structure to it, but not too much of a structure where it becomes difficult. And so literally what would happen is a walk and talk is literally that. You go out for a cigarette, there's a lot of people in the military smoke, you go out for a cigarette and you just walk. And, you know, it's very informal, it's very casual, it's very not intimidating, it's not structured, it's not deemed as anything clinical, but it's a process. And it's a process that's very effective. So what a defusing is, and I like to call it taking the fuse out of the bomb, is a very brief, structured intervention that any one of us can do. So you can do it with a colleague if you're sitting next to someone and you see one of your colleagues is feeling, going through a very difficult situation or feeling stressed. Or you can use it with a client as well. So it's a very brief, structured intervention designed to take the fuse out of the emotional component of the situation or the bomb, if you will. And it usually occurs after the situation that is causing the emotional stress of the bomb part. So I say critical incident, but keep in mind, the critical incident can be anything that you find overwhelming at that point. And it's conducted on or near the situation. So it can be done in your office, it can be done when you go for a walk with a colleague for coffee, it can be done face-to-face with a client or on the phone or anywhere really, as long as you're doing the process. It's very important. And it's designed really to alleviate the stressors in the moment. It's not designed to perform psychotherapy. It's not designed to do anything like that. It's a very short-term type intervention that is extremely effective in the moment. So I just want to go back for a second. Sorry about that. What a debriefing is, and typically we don't do a lot of debriefings because that in itself is a very structured process. I've done a few of them. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of planning. And then debriefings tend to happen in groups. So if something happens at work, or you're dealing with a group situation, debriefings can work, and they can be very effective. But it is a very structured psychological intervention, which requires a lot more structure centered around it and a lot more safety aspects put into place. Also designed to reduce the reactions to a critical incident or stressor type situation. The majority of things I've done over my years are the diffusing because they're quick. As I say, as we say in the field, it's quick and dirty. You go in, you get it done, and it's your house, which quite a lot of people like to do. So what I like to do is just sort of break it down and kind of do an anatomy lesson on these processes that we do. So a diffusing, again, like I said, it's very structured, but not so structured that it becomes a hindrance in any way. So the first thing that we typically do, and you can, again, do with a client or with a colleague, is you want to explore the fact phase. And why we go into facts, first of all, is because anytime you talk about facts, there's not an emotional component attached to it. So it's a safe way to enter into the process. And facts are facts. You really can't mince them. They are what they are. So if you're with a colleague, you allow the person to tell their story. So for me as a manager, I do a lot of these diffusings in a day where somebody comes to me and they need to talk about, a really difficult counseling session on the phone or a chat. And so I get them to tell me about their story. I want to hear what's going on for them. So tell me about the facts. And once we've gone to that point and they've shared their story, then we go into the thought process. So we ask some similar questions around, what were you thinking at that point when you said this? Or what were your thoughts at that time when, they started talking about the abuse in childhood? Things like that. So we examine the thoughts and we try to find out what the thoughts are, if there was anything specific popping up for them. Once we've done that, then we slowly start moving into the lower part of the house, if you will. So we start to go into the basement and we look at the reactions. And this is where a lot of the burnout and stress is centered, because now we're getting into the emotional aspect of things. So we ask questions that, something similar to, where did you notice you reacted the most in your counseling session? What was the hardest part for you? And the reason we ask a lot of these very specific questions is we're looking at the potential of trigger points. And we find that if these trigger points are not looked at, this is what can create vicarious trauma down the road. This is what can create other trigger points. The more you don't acknowledge, the more that you end up repressing and things come out. So once we've explored a person's reactions, all without judgment, all without really going into a therapy type situation, we're just hearing. We look at some of the symptoms that they may experience depending on the severity of the situation or the session. We talk about symptom education. And of course, we're all, I would say the majority of us are mental health professionals, so we probably already know about the symptoms of what we may or may not experience. But it's always good to go over it again, because when you've gone through a difficult situation, oftentimes it's easy to forget what those symptoms can be. And the symptoms are exhaustive. I mean, there's a lot of them. So we tend to talk a bit about common reactions after a difficult situation. And then we look at their current functioning. So are they ready to then go back out on the floor to take another phone call, to take another chat with a client? Would your colleague be ready to go back out there and do another session with somebody face-to-face? Whatever it is, are they ready to go back out there and re-engage in the process? If they are, great. If not, okay, what else can we do about that? The debriefing is, you'll notice some similarities to the diffusing process, but there's a few more additions at the end. So again, we look at the facts, just the facts. That's how we enter everything. There's no emotion attached to it, just tell me what happened. Thought process gives us insight to negative thought processes for the therapist. So we're looking at bad recordings, things that could start to generate in our minds, things that could lead to triggers. Reactions. So, and I have somatic there, so oftentimes we notice the reactions in a difficult situation we tend to feel in our body. So there may be certain parts of our body that light up in a way. So if somebody's feeling anxious, they feel a tightness in their chest or their stomach, or they tense up, or if they are scared, or if they're fearful, other things, they may carry that in different places in the body. So it gives us insight to possible development of increased anxieties, which is what we call biological intelligence or biological computer. When did you react the most? So it helps the person who is going through this process, helps them to understand a little bit more about how they behave in certain situations and how they're going to react. And then we move into the feelings phase, just like the diffusing. So what were you feeling at that time? Will help us to identify potential future triggers. And if you can help with that, it will help reduce the level of stress that we carry into the next situation. And anywhere, really. Once we can identify things, they become less scary. And then we look at symptom education, common reactions that we typically see. Have a hard time eating, sleeping, maybe sleeping more, things like that. And through the PowerPoint, we go a little bit more into that. It's just, I won't focus too much on that right now. We look at then current function. How are they right now that they've gone through the process? Are they able to move out there and continue doing their work, or do they need to go home and decompress and do what they need to do for self-care? And then we have a re-entry phase. So if it's something that's really, really intense, there may be times where they may have to take some time off, some significant time off. If it's a leave because of it, then we look at how do we promote a healthy re-entry into the workplace. So we look at short-term coping strategies, whether that's through EAP or other ways that a person has that they use for self-care. It's also important to look at different types of stress that we all experience. And whether you're in this field or whether you're a stay-at-home mom or dad or whatever you're doing, we all experience different types of stress. Some are good, some are not so good. So the different types of stress, we look at cumulative, normal stress, burnout, critical incident stress, and post-traumatic stress. So cumulative stress, I think we can all relate to this. Cumulative stress does not necessarily just have to focus on the workplace or the type of profession that we work in. Cumulative can incorporate every aspect of our life. And it's a slow developing process. And this is why it creeps up on so many people, because it is slow. And before you know it, you get to a point where you lose it, you go through a burnout, you just reach a point. It's like the saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. This is what we're talking about, cumulative stress. Normal stress is good, just like you have good cholesterol and you have bad cholesterol. So normal stress is like the good cholesterol, something that you need in your life because it's just part of who we are, it's part of what we do. And it's the natural response of the body to any demand. It could be just getting up in the morning. It can be a normal stress. Having kids, getting married, anything that can be part of life, it's a normal occurrence, which we can experience in our daily lives. And based on how we perceive things, can be perceived as both positive or negative. Burnout stress, we see this quite a bit, and obviously you probably are maybe experiencing some of that now. That's why you're watching and listening to this webinar. Is because if you're in this profession and working as frontline staff, I guarantee you, if you haven't experienced burnout stress, you probably will at some point. And that's okay, because that tells me that you're human. But understanding it makes it less scary and more understandable. It's the result of cumulative stress, carrying that for far too long, and it occurs when an individual experiences an ongoing high level of stress for a long period of time. This is when bad things happen to your body and you start to experience more physical illnesses, more headaches, more days off of work, more tightness of the body, things like that. Your body is trying to give you a message. Basically, it's a state of just being exhausted. You have no energy. Critical incident stress means that it's gone up a notch. So this means that it's impacting physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral aspects of you. So it's really all consuming, and it's related to the critical incident itself. And so these reactions have the potential to interfere with an individual's ability to function effectively. And so this is very specific to the situation that you dealt with. We see this a lot with military, law enforcement. I've seen it with my own counselors. And that's why this is really important, because counselors do work front line, and this is why it's important for all of you to have this information, so you understand that it's normal to experience a lot of this, but it's also okay to acknowledge and work through. Critical incident stress and good to talk and kids help phone. So I put this in here to give you an idea that it doesn't have to just be something huge, like I was talking about earlier. You don't have to be in law enforcement or the military or firefighting to experience this kind of stress. You could be working with a client in private practice or at school and experience critical incident stress. And we at Good to Talk, as well as Kids on Phone, experience this all the time. The intensity of what we get is absolutely incredible, that a lot of people don't understand, and I'm sure that all of you can relate to this. So some of the examples that I have here, we deal with child abuse situations every day. We deal with relationship and domestic violence situations every day. Self-harm is a very big topic, which I'm sure working out of school and universities you hear about quite often. Suicide is everywhere you look. It's a hot topic out there, on social media especially. And when I say suicide, for us, it's like looking at, is it in progress, which we sometimes get, or is there an immediate threat in our calls or chats? What kind of language is being used? Is the graphic language that's being used to describe maybe how they self-harm or how they plan on ending their life? Combine that with the limited control that we have. So dealing with somebody face-to-face, you may have a bit more control because you know who they are and where they're at, and you can get that immediate feedback. Whereas somebody on a phone call or a chat or doing a Skype situation, we have limited control of what we can do. And so there may be some of that control is maybe real or it's perceived on how much control we have. Unknown outcomes of serious counseling interactions or interventions really leaves people in a state of, oftentimes they draw their own conclusions based on past experiences and perceptions of a situation. Exposure to the repeated intensity of contact. So if you're seeing one client after another who is dealing with heavy situations, you're dealing with 4 or 5 clients who are all suicidal, that's going to build up on you if you don't purge a lot of that, you don't talk about it. Trigger contacts. So child abuse is oftentimes a huge trigger for a lot of people, especially if they're parents. post-traumatic stress disorder, this is something that can happen if it goes for a long period of time. Acute stress and critical incident stress is not dealt with in a timely manner. It can then manifest and turn into post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's really only diagnosed through psychologists, psychiatrists. We don't diagnose here, obviously, but we have an understanding of where it comes from and how best to deal with it in the moment. Factors that can affect the severity of critical incident stress reactions. The severity and nature of the event or incident. Role of what you do. You know, are you frontline? Are you, seeing 5-6 clients a day who are self-harm, who are suicidal, or being involved in domestic violence situations? If you're on the initial receiving end of that, that's going to ramp up your chances of experiencing more emotion. Level of responsibility associated with the incident. Physical and psychological proximity to the event. The more removed you are, the less impact you're probably going to feel. Your previous experience with personal crisis. So a lot of things can compile and then can manifest into something bigger if it's not been dealt with. Availability of appropriate support services. I would say a lot of people working front lines have support to some degree. Some of that may be personal support. Some of it may be EAP, other kinds of support. Whatever really is working for you. But as long as there is support, that's really what makes a huge difference. If you are involved with, you have a lot of friends and you hang out, you're very social, you may be less impacted by a lot of this. But if you're more isolated, you're more shy, withdrawn, it may impact you a little bit more. Immediate involvement of the actual situation can make a difference. Management's attitude and knowledge towards traumatic stress. This is a huge key for successful workplace. And we see this with, right now, law enforcement, military. They don't have the right support in place in the work environment. The higher the chances of them experiencing higher levels of stress goes up. I really didn't want that in there. I have to take the sound out, but it can add some flavor. Common post-crisis reactions. As you can see, these are pretty straightforward. And again, this is not a complete list, but a lot of things, without really going into a lot of detail, but I've experienced some of these when I've gone through the process of doing defusings and debriefings and being on the front line. So I can speak specifically to some of these, and I've seen them in other people who I've worked with. This is more for an organization, which is, it's important to look at these kind of warning signs that maybe there is a lot of critical incident stress that seems to be moving through your employees. So whether you're working in a university or college, even our environment, it could be hospitals, if you start to see certain behaviors or certain things happening over and over again, it's usually a very good sign that something is not right with your employees. So if you see a higher level of accidents, absenteeism, harassment, negative attitudes towards colleagues, management, things like that, it's usually a good sign that something is amiss, and probably there needs to be something more that needs to be done to support employees. The process, the stress recovery process can take some time. The first part is to really, first of all, recognize that you do need to recover and that it is okay to recover. and to understand that regardless of what happens, the symptoms that you experience at the time, it's okay. It's understandable, and it's normal considering the situation. So, as you'll see on the screen, some things are very straightforward. Imagery that may pop up and become intrusive during the day or at night. Moments of feeling numb or anger or rage that comes out of nowhere. This can be a good sign that maybe something is not quite right. Keeping in mind that we're all different, we're all human, and we are unique in every way. So we tend to experience symptoms differently and maybe at different times. So there are no timelines for any of this. It happens, and it depends on the person and the support that you have. And keep in mind that symptoms usually get worse before they get better. So I always use the analogy of when you're cleaning out your garage, your closet, it's got to get messier before it gets cleaner. And so this is exactly what this looks like. So when somebody says, oh, it's getting worse and worse, that's okay. That's okay. But to keep going. And don't block. Don't block or resist what comes up, because that's stuff that needs to be worked through. And to understand that what happens with you and what you're feeling is extremely responsive to counseling and critical incident stress management. So whatever it is that you're feeling and experiencing in every way, shape, or form, it is extremely responsive. The thing is to be gentle with yourself and to be patient with yourself, because everybody takes different times to heal. And understand too that what you may be feeling, some of the symptoms may not ever go away. But that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. But understanding what it is and why it's there is more important. It becomes part of who we are. It becomes more of, makes us a better person in the long run if you've taken the time to understand it, to process it, and you can use some of that to then better help the clients that are coming to you. There may be moments where you have sudden recall of what's happening, feelings, images, dreams, things like that. And really, some good can come from any tragic and traumatic situation. Once you've gone through it and you've explored what's happening for you, there's a lot of good things that can come from that situation. You can take all kinds of things from it, all kinds of learnings. It's depending on how you perceive it and what kind of meaning you attach to certain things. Okay. Coping is, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but coping is really, really important, and it's going to be different for everybody. So what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. So really look at what is important for you and how you manage your self-care, and focus on that and do what is right. What we do encourage for anybody who's gone through a very difficult or traumatic situation is we encourage people to stay away from, of course, alcohol, illegal drugs, caffeine, being overly caffeinated, because a lot of that can, especially the caffeine, can heighten one's anxiety if you're already feeling it. You don't want to heighten it anymore. And of course, using alcohol and drugs can just alter one's consciousness and perceptions on things, and can make things unsafe. You'll see different things, writing, journaling, meditation. So it really depends what works for you, and that's really something that I would encourage all of you to do. You don't have to be traumatized to practice self-care. I added this because I think this really sums up all of what we do on the front lines as counselors, therapists, however you perform your craft in the environment that you're in, is that compassion hurts. We're in a profession where we absorb a lot from other people. We absorb a lot of pain and anxiety and a lot of stuff from other people. We are sponges, essentially. And so I really like this quote. Compassion hurts. When you feel connected to everything, you also feel responsible for everything. And you can't just turn away. Your destiny is bound with the destinies of others. And you must learn to carry the universe or be crushed by it. And that's a big responsibility. You must grow strong enough to love the world, yet empty enough to sit down at the same table with its worst forms. And I think that in itself pretty much sums up all of what we do. And it's a profession that not a lot of people understand. A lot of people have perceptions of what we do. Must be, how can you be traumatized? You sit in an office and you talk to people all day. So, but it's not that easy. And this brings us to the end of the webinar. I hope that you were able to derive some sort of wisdom from it, understanding. It's kind of like a bit of a whirlwind, but certainly if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them to the best of my ability. But I think that for all of what we do, I think it's really important to understand that we as frontline people, we do experience burnout, we do experience stress, and that we are human. Which I think initially goes against what we originally thought of ourselves when we got into this profession. We thought we could go in and fix everybody and solve all the world's problems. And that bubble usually gets burst pretty quickly. So be patient with yourself and be gentle with yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason. And just to everyone else, now if you have any questions, just send them in via the question function on your desktop. It should be there. And we actually have a couple of questions already rolling in. First one is, Jason, how do you differentiate when you need a debriefing as opposed to conducting a defusing, especially in a workplace where multiple events can take place throughout the day or even in a week?
That's a good question. Defusings are usually the first go-to because they can be done quickly. They can be done one-on-one. Defusings can be done in small groups. Usually that's the first go-to after a situation. I wouldn't suggest going into massive debriefing right away. I think that can happen afterwards, after a defusing is done. And if there's still some emotional residue that's left over, then that's where debriefing will really come in handy. And there's some very strict structures and protocols for debriefing that, depending on what the situation is or what the incident was, you have to have certain grouping of people together. So what I mean by that, I'll give you an illustration of what I'm trying to explain. So when we were doing debriefings with the military, and something happened out in the field where something traumatic happened, I'll give you a different story. So when I went out to do a debriefing at a bank, did a lot of bank robbery defusings afterwards. We have to split the groups. So there's a primary victims, what we call them. So primary victims are the ones that are, the ones that are being directly victimized. So the teller that gets the gun shoved in their face. Those would be the primary victims. Secondary victims would be people who were maybe in the back offices when the robbery was happening, but weren't exposed to the direct traumatic situation of having the gun thrown in their face. We're not going to put primary victims and secondary victims together. The reason for that is the likelihood of traumatizing the secondary victims goes up. So you're going to try to contain the traumatic instance and the fallout from that. And you're going to keep all your primary victims together and deal with them separately. And then you're going to deal with the secondary victims separately as well. So as not to have any vicarious trauma. Does that make sense? So Berlin, I'm not hearing what you're saying.
Hello?
Was yeah.
Oh, no. I must have been gesturing without actually saying anything. The question was, many times in healthcare, the person doing the debrief has also been in the event. So what's your opinion on the effectiveness of this, and should the debriefer also be debriefed?
Yes, that's a very good question as well. It's a common question that we get. The person who is doing the debriefing or the diffusing should not have been involved in the situation. The reason for that is the person that's leading it, especially if it's a debriefing, the person that's leading it needs to be objective. They need to be removed from the situation. So in that case, you would have to bring in somebody maybe from another department who may be trained in peer support, or you may need to bring in an external support to be able to lead that debriefing. But if somebody has been traumatized, they shouldn't be leading any diffusings or debriefings, because it won't be effective for the other people, and it won't be effective for them. In fact, it will probably re-traumatize them.
Yeah, it's very true. When you're in the situation, it can be very hard to make that step back.
And we see that a lot. We see that a lot in law enforcement. They actually bring in other police departments to do the diffusing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question's come in. I often have to interview staff involved in a critical event in order to inform a system review, and I worry that this is re-traumatizing for them. Is there anything that I can do to make it more comfortable?
I think just to be able to, first off, acknowledge that what is happening is potentially re-traumatizing, and I think checking in with them, first off. And just sort of talking to them about it, and acknowledging that you are aware that it could possibly be re-traumatizing them, and just sort of get their feedback on how they actually do feel about it. Because it could come down to, they may be perfectly fine. They may have worked through a lot of stuff, and they may be okay to go through the process. Or it could be that they are feeling that it could re-traumatize them. They just didn't know how to bring it up, or they didn't want to bring it up. So if you think that might be a situation, check in, be honest, be upfront, be transparent with them, and I find that always goes a long way. And at least you know where you stand.
That's a good point. Wow, questions are just rolling in here. Someone's asking, is there a best practice approach for suggestions regarding how frontline staff workers can remain in the more functional stress zones while working, as opposed to moving into the dangerous chronic stress areas? And I think this sounds like more like a prevention question. What do you think?
I think prevention is is very important in a lot of workplaces, and I think that a lot more workplaces are starting to implement stress management type programs, which sometimes can be accessed through EAP or through other programs that may be set up within the organization. Ultimately, to be proactive is best, rather than always being reactive. We find that if you're always running in a reactive mode, it's extremely exhausting and it catches up to people. But sometimes, stuff happens and we do have to be reactive. But for the most part, if we can create a stress management type situation or program or environment, that is going to go a long way for a much healthier workplace. You're going to have more positive employees. You're going to notice a big change in how your employees respond and behave in the environment.
Next question. I tried to assess if, sorry, I was reading. I try to assess if perceptions of the workplace to be trauma-informed or not is associated with levels of burnout. And I also looked at other built environment factors. What kind of organizational factors do you feel are most helpful and should be implemented by organizations to ensure that providers face low burnout or feel valued?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I don't know if there's a simple answer to that one. I think that it really is dependent on each environment that a person works in. And I would like to think that anybody who works in an environment where mental health seems to be the predominant profession, universities, colleges, good to talk, hospitals, you name it, I would like to think that programs are implemented, and I would like to think that there are staff trained properly to deal with situations that may become traumatic or overwhelming. But also there should be programs in place, and I think a lot of places should make it mandatory, where stress reduction, stress management needs to be in place for a healthy work environment. We shouldn't wait to be reactive. We shouldn't wait for something to happen before we realize, oh, wow, look at that. That's not a good thing. And we weren't prepared on how to deal with that. I think regular trainings, regular self-care should be promoted within the workplace. I don't know if that answers the question at all, but hopefully.
Speaking of self-care, though, someone says, I know self-care and being consistent with this goes a long way, but can you suggest anything beyond these basic habits that will make a frontline worker more resilient to succumbing to the cumulative aspects of the stress on the job?
Resilience is, we're often pretty stubborn individuals. Doctors say that they're their own worst patients. I would like us to chalk us up in that same category, that we can be extremely stubborn. That way, when it comes to dealing with stress, usually it has to mean that we get to a point of being burnt out or overwhelmed before we actually start paying attention to ourselves. But I think that the more aware you are of your own reactions, your own body in every aspect, and how you respond to certain things, how, learn about how resilient you are, how, looking at the areas that you find yourself responding to quicker. You find yourself quick to anger over certain things. Are there hot topics in your life that act as trigger points? Maybe those are usually good points to start with. Oftentimes, unfortunately, you have to learn the hard way. I've done that. I've learned the hard way. But now I look at my life and look at what works for me, what doesn't work for me, and what am I prepared to push through, and what am I prepared to deal with, and how do I best deal with it? And I think most of that comes down to self-awareness and admitting that you are human first and foremost, and that whatever you do experience, it's okay to experience it as long as you have the right supports in your life to help you work through it. And I think anybody in the mental health profession, going for counseling, getting therapy, not a thing at all. It helps us to learn more about ourselves.
And we're almost at 2 o'clock, so we just have one last question, and I promise you can go, Jason. Someone says, one of my frontline employees is stressed out and shares this information with me about once a month. I have suggested counseling, and they are looking into it by accessing our employee assistance program. I wonder if it would be more helpful for me to offer to do a walk and talk at their request if they experience stress on a particular day and time. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I like that suggestion quite a bit, actually. It sounds like this employee comes to you once a month, but by the time they come to you, their tank is full. And so they purge it to you, and then they go off for another month, fill their tank up, and they come back and they do it all over again. So it seems a bit redundant after a while. It's great that they're coming forward and they're talking about it and they feel safe with you, and obviously you've created that safe space with them, and that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. The walk and talks I love because they are so informal, and you can do it just going for a coffee in the morning. It can be so informal. It's like, hey, so how's it going? I do walk and talks every day here. Let's go for lunch. Let's, it's nice out. Let's go get some air. Tell me what's going on. How are you? The more times you can do that in a way that's very informal and non-threatening, you'll find that their tank remains lower for a longer period of time. And they won't be coming to you once a month to purge everything that's happened within the last month. They'll find that they're going to be able to cope with a loved one because you are allowing them to learn as they go. They're not only expressing, but they're also learning.
All right, thank you very much, Jason, for presenting with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm just going to direct you right now to our website, campusmentalhealth.ca, where you can find lots of other resources in post-secondary mental health, and also all the recordings for our past webinars and this webinar as well, which will be made available on our website. You can also sign up there for our mailing list, which we use to distribute our monthly newsletter. I'm just pulling it up on the screen right now so that you can see. Yes. Okay, that's our website. And our newsletter goes out every month, and it contains all the relevant news from the sector and also future registration for webinars. And of course, don't forget that at the end of this webinar, a survey will come up, and we would really, really appreciate if you fill out the survey because it really helps us see and understand what are your needs in learning so that we can host future webinars that cater to that. And one last thing is also a plug for our British Columbia counterparts, Healthy Minds, Healthy Campus. They're also hosting a webinar today on peer support programs on campuses from 2:30 to 3:30, so that's just right after this, and that's 2:30 to 3:30 EST. So it's just showing you, yes, this is the peer support webinar, and I will share the webinar registration via the chat as well. So feel free to sign up if it is something that you're interested in. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.